New Year's Eve or something, and I don't think Slash could do it. For some reason, he couldn't do it. He knew ahead of time he couldn't do it, or he didn't want to do it, or something. So I had been talking, because we were friends, I've been talking to Izzy, and he said, well, why don't we just get together again, and we'll all do it.
The 1984 New Year's Eve reunion show was to prove to be Hollywood Rose's swan song. Axl soon began to play with another local band, LA Guns. Together with the band's guitarist Tracy, the pair formed a spin-off group along with Izzy, Rob Gardner, and newly recruited Duff McKagan.
The way Guns N' Roses came together is the way a lot of bands come together. The dynamics in the present group wasn't working. You know, they knew it didn't have magic, and musicians are always looking for that magic to happen. And so they started putting out ads and reading ads in magazines and publications, two of them being one, The Recycler, the other Music Connection magazine. And they did start putting members together that way. I believe that's the way they found Duff, in fact, because he was with his own band.
The name of the band was a mixture of the two bands, LA Guns and Hollywood Rose. And because Axl had played in LA Guns for a short period of time, at some point put the two names together, LA Guns and Hollywood Rose, and then they formed them together, and then they started gigging under that name, Guns N' Roses.
On March the 26th, 1985, a flyer for a show at the Troubadour appeared, bearing the name Guns N' Roses. However, almost as soon as the band had formed, their lineup began to change. Both Tracy Guns and Rob Gardner left, making way for Slash to return to the lead spot, bringing with him Steven Adler on drums, completing the lineup that would go on to become one of the biggest bands in the world. Almost immediately, the newly formed unit embarked upon what would become known as the Hell Tour.
When the band first got together, Duff, who had been in a prior band and he came from Seattle, his earlier band had a few gigs up north in Seattle. And these were paying gigs. I mean, they were supposed to get about a couple $100, $250 a gig. And so he figured since his old band no longer existed, his new band, they could all hit the road, go up to Seattle and make a few bucks and play. You know, sounds cool. Well, on their way there, they all go. On their way there, of course, they have this old, I don't know if it was a car or a van, but it was old, it was rotten, it was breaking down, and indeed it broke down before they ever got to where they were supposed to be. They managed to get into town, either hitchhiking or grabbing rides. I think they even abandoned the vehicle and started doing these shows. What they discovered are two things that every artist knows nowadays. You're not going to have any people in the house if you don't promote it. Well, none of the venues promoted the shows. They didn't even know Guns N' Roses was coming. They thought it was the other band. And so when Guns N' Roses started playing, they were lucky if there were 10 people watching them. And of course, that just made the venue owners and managers very angry. And I think they might have made $50, maybe $100 off that whole tour, because many of them refused to pay them at all. And they managed to scrape enough to get back to LA, and Slash used to say, Slash said, you know, that tour almost killed us. Well, what it did is it made them more of a unit because they suffered through it. And that tour was real grief for them, it really was.
Returning to LA, the band moved in with Vicky Hamilton, who was now their manager.
When I lived with Guns N' Roses, we lived on Clark Street, which is kind of catty corner to the Whiskey A Go-Go. You know, it was like me and Jennifer Perry shared the bedroom, and all the guys lived in the living room, and it was just always a mess. There was like beer cans, and you know, they lived on McDonald's, and French fries all over the floor, and sleeping bags, and amps, and just hideous, really.
And even when they lived with Vicky, one of the first articles that was ever written about Guns N' Roses, and in fact the first cover they ever had was in Music Connection. And in that article, the writer describes the place, and it's Vicky's apartment. It's not their place, it's Vicky's apartment, and how trashed it was. I mean, you know, these are young rock and roll guys, and the last thing they're thinking about is picking up after themselves. And so hygiene left a lot to be desired.
During the remainder of 1985, Axl and Guns N' Roses became regulars on the LA club scene. As their audience began to grow, so too did the interest from record companies.
Guns N' Roses became popular the old-fashioned way. They didn't manufacture anything. It was all word of mouth. People couldn't stop talking about them. If someone had seen the show, they'd tell a friend. They'd bring another friend to the next show. That friend brought another friend. And it almost seemed like overnight, although I'm sure it took a little while, but, you know, during those days it seemed, God, this is happening fast. Because in the first shows when you saw them, you know, you were lucky to have 20, 30, 40 people there. But within a very short period of time, this band started bringing hundreds of people until there were lines of hundreds of people outside who couldn't get in the venue.
Their crowd just started building and building and building. And I just looked at it as just a rock band, you know, that had a lot of fans. I mean, there was, you know, the music scene back then, there was a lot of bands out there. They were drawing the most.
When you went to a live performance, Axl was one of those lead men who was not only charismatic, he was also volatile, and the whole band felt dangerous. That danger is part of rock and roll.
The way he acted on stage was the way he was feeling. Like, there were shows where he would be running around in your face trying to piss you off, wearing something that you're like, what the hell is that? But then there was days that he would just stand on shows. He would just stand there and just be like more like mellow. It was like either the, you know, drugs he did, or if he got a warrant that week, if he was sad, if he was happy, you could see that on stage. And then with this band just, you know, backing him up was just always this incredible, and just the sound you would hear, and, you know, and like whether and I can recall sometimes where his vocal wasn't high enough, so it was blurred out, but it didn't matter because his movement just said it all. It's like he wanted to piss you off, but in a good way, and he knew that you would go home and talk about him and his band.
It soon became impossible for the labels to ignore Guns N' Roses, and before long, several majors were interested.
Well, they were being seen by quite a few labels. I know Vicky initially had Elektra out to see them, and I'm sure she had a slew of others. I don't know how many others saw them. But Geffen had hired the A&R guy who found Guns N' Roses by the name of Tom Zutaut from Elektra, because he had signed Motley Crue, and Geffen wanted another Motley Crue. So they hired the A&R dude, right? So he's there, and he gets to the show.
They all came to this Troubadour show. I remember that there was like 20 A&R people out on the sidewalk in front of the Troubadour before they signed with Geffen. And Tom Zutaut said to me out on the curb, because it was so loud inside, they were all outside, and he said to me, he's like, if that guy can really sing, I'll sign them. And I like handed him the demo, and he's like, get them in my office tomorrow. So I brought them in. The next night, they went over to Tom's house and played Aerosmith records all night long, and the next day, they were just like, we're signing with Geffen.
According to them, they liked him the best because the first thing he said to them is that they were the loudest band he's ever heard, and that impressed them. They sort of liked that because they felt they were the loudest band anyone's ever heard.
It was funny, though, the day that we were supposed to sign the contract, we were like 2 hours late. Axl couldn't find his contact lenses, and he was like,